Welcome to the Specific Learning Disability Eligibility Determination PowerPoint. Today we're going to talk about how to plan and conduct evaluations to determine specific learning disability eligibility. This professional learning will help you to address Indicator 3A, participates in professional learning opportunities and applies what is learned, and 3F, meeting IEP requirements as part of your professional responsibilities rubric. Our learning objectives for today are that I can identify appropriate steps to take when designing an assessment plan, and I understand the IDEA and ECEA eligibility criteria for specific learning disabilities and how to determine a student's eligibility. Let's get started. A specific learning disability is defined in Colorado statute as follows. A specific learning disability means a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations, including conditions such as perceptual disabilities, brain injury, minimal brain dysfunction, dyslexia, and developmental aphasia. Let's unpack that a little. When the law says a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes, these are some examples. Perception could be auditory or visual perception. Language might include phonology, the ability to hear that words are made up of sounds and to segment and blend those sounds. Morphology, the understanding of what the smallest unit of a word means. Semantics, syntax, or discourse. Cognition could include attention, memory, processing speed, reasoning, or executive functioning. So that breakdown may manifest itself in an imperfect ability to read, to listen, to think, to speak, to spell, or engage in mathematics. When we think about planning our evaluation, according to Colorado's special education law, the ECEA, only the parent of a child or someone within Jeffco with direct knowledge of the student can refer them for a special education evaluation. Take a moment to pause. Think back to what you know about the referral process and outcomes. Consider what you have learned and experienced with the referral process. Let's talk about planning the evaluation. When we have a referral meeting, we should identify the suspected area or areas of disability. Some people think this means that we're predetermining, but that is not the case. Whether the parent has asked for a special ed evaluation or a staff member, somebody probably has a specific disability area in mind. Knowing what the suspected area of disability is helps us to plan which assessments we should use. It is very helpful to reference the eligibility checklist to make sure that you are gathering the right data as part of the process. Here is the SLD eligibility checklist. You'll note it has a definition of SLD at the top, the factors that we have to rule out, and then the specific criteria for a learning disability. Finally, this section contains all the information that we are supposed to have provided to parents and is documented in the evaluation report, and that the team has ruled out other disability areas as being the primary cause of the learning problem. For SLD only, all team members have to indicate whether they agree or disagree with the determination of eligibility. We'll come back to this form. Once we've looked at the eligibility checklist, for each of the criteria, we need to identify evidence. We'll visit that in the next slides. At the same time, we'll want to determine a due date for completing all of our assessments and strategies and schedule an eligibility determination meeting. Remember, You have 60 days to complete the evaluation and have the eligibility meeting. For SLD only, the law does allow that if all parties agree, we can gain mutual consent to extend the evaluation period if we need more information to determine eligibility. The next step is to identify the criteria. First, we want to look at our existing body of evidence. What do we know about the student and their current performance? Next, we want to look at any gaps in the body of evidence. What don't we have yet? Once we've done this, we'll identify what tools or strategies we will use for collecting additional data. A helpful acronym is RIOT. It stands for Review, Interview, Observe, and Test. Review means we look back at the student's body of evidence, previous work in school, and understand what's been happening academically and emotionally for that student. Interview could be interview of the student's family, of teachers of that student to understand better where learning challenges have been observed and the impact of those. It's always important to observe a student in their learning environment to understand how any challenges are impacting their progress in school. Finally, we can administer tests to students. Note the T here is hyperlinked to the Jeffco assessment library page. You will see a link to the assessment directory that gives you a list of all the assessments Jeffco has at our assessment library. If you scroll down, there are some speech language assessment tools that can be used for determining a learning disability, including phonemic awareness and phonological awareness and written language. And if you scroll down a little bit further, you will also see bilingual assessments and learning specialist assessment tools. We have tools for phonics and reading, for writing, and for math. The last step of planning is to make sure you identify who will be responsible for collecting any additional needed data. The purpose of our evaluation is to understand whether or not the student meets the criteria for special education eligibility. There are two major eligibility criteria that must be met and demonstrated through a body of evidence. The first is achievement. The child does not achieve adequately for their age or to meet state-approved grade level standards and exhibits significant academic skill deficits in one or more areas. This means there is a significant gap between the expected achievement and the actual achievement. These are the areas for which a student might have a specific learning disability. If you are considering oral expression or listening comprehension, you must work closely with your speech language pathologist to make this determination. Other areas include written expression, basic reading skills, which include phonological processing and phonics, reading fluency skills, reading comprehension, mathematical calculation, and mathematics problem solving. The second criteria is that the child does not make sufficient progress to meet age or state approved grade level standards in one or more of those areas identified when using a process based on the child's response to scientific, research based intervention. This means we must provide a student with interventions in the area of need and measure their progress over time. If they are unable to close the gap given those research based interventions, then it would be considered a learning disability. To do this, we'll use a body of evidence. Data demonstrating an academic skill deficit. For this criteria, you must have at least one norm referenced assessment. Again, that assessment link takes you back to our assessment library page. This could include curriculum-based measures, and it could also include data about performance in content classes, not just in skill development. Take a moment to pause the video and think about what assessments you use besides the KTEA. Please feel free to document them on this Padlet and to see what your colleagues have documented. Pause the video. I'll be here when you get back. When we think about demonstrating a gap, the first thing that we want to do is gather that data. We want to look at the present level of academic and functional performance. That's what the current is currently doing, and compare it to the grade level, norms, or benchmarks, or targets, the desired performance. The space in between is known as the gap. So when we do the gap analysis, we're going to take a look at how big the gap is. There are three types of assessments that we might consider. Research-based norms, those are usually based on national distributions and national assessments of students. We could also look at local benchmarks. For example, if you look at your MAP assessments and compare the student to other Jeffco students or other students in your school. And then finally, criterion referenced assessments. The criterion referenced assessments are how a student compares to a standard, not compared to other students. There are 4 steps for completing a gap analysis. Step number 1, identify if a significant gap exists. Step number 2, determine the gain needed in order to close the gap. Step 3, determine the student's expected rate of performance. And step 4, take action. Let's look at an example. Before we do that, a few notes. Best practice says we need at least one norm referenced measure to provide consistency across schools and districts in interpretation of significance. KTEA is an example of a nationally norm referenced assessment. Scores at or below the 12th percentile, or 1.5 standard deviations below the mean, may represent a significant deficit. This is a professional judgment and not a hard and fast rule. If a student scores in the 13th percentile, for example, they may still be eligible as having a learning disability if other criteria are met. Norm-referenced assessments help us with identification of specific learning disabilities and should provide valuable information for developing IEP goals and determining appropriate instruction or interventions. Now let's look at our example. Step 1, identify if a significant gap exists. To do this, we're going to take our desired performance, what we want the student to do, and divide it by the actual performance. That gives us a gap. We consider a gap of 2 or more significant. For example, the end of year oral reading fluency benchmark for 4th grade is 90 words per minute. That's our desired performance. Mateo is reading 20 words per minute in August. That's Mateo's actual performance. If we take 90 divided by 20, we get a gap of 4.5. Is that significant? I hope you said yes. Step 2, determine the gain needed to close the gap. We're going to take that desired performance again and subtract the actual performance. That's how much is needed to close the gap. In the case of Mateo, we take the 90 words per minute that's desired and subtract the 20 words per minute that he is currently doing, and we identify the gain needed to close the gap as 70 words per minute. Step 3, determine the student's expected rate of performance. To do this, we take the gain needed and divide it by how many weeks we have left to achieve the goal. And that is the expected growth over time. Going back to our friend Mateo, he needed 70 words to grow. Divide it by 12 weeks left in school. That's how long he has to achieve it. And we get 5.9 words per minute as the expected growth over time to close the gap. So here we have put it all together. 90 divided by 20 is a gap of 4.5. This is significant. 90 minus 20 equals 70 words per minute needed to close the gap. And 70 words per minute divided by 12 equals 5.9 words per week as the expected growth. So if we take 12 weeks times that 5.9 to double check our math, we see that gets us right about there. Why would we do this? What's the reason for a gap analysis? Well, it helps to make informed interpretations and to make decisions. For example, is there sufficiency of learning? Is the student closing the gap over time? Is our instruction and intervention having an impact? If not, do we need to adjust our instruction or intervention? Do we need to consider referral for special education eligibility? It can also help us with making eligibility decisions for special ed, and it can also inform what special education services a student might need if found eligible. Once again, take a moment to pause the video. Think about what you're thinking about now that you hadn't thought about before, and if you have any lingering questions about gap analysis. I'll be here when you get back. Welcome back. We're going to look at our second criteria for SLD eligibility. This is the one that's most frequently missing from our evaluation reports. We are looking to see if a student is making insufficient progress in response to research-based interventions. We need to include progress monitoring data that shows how a student responded to the interventions. To do this, we should have a systematic approach, a variety of data collection methods, performance data collected frequently over time to evaluate the student's response to instruction and intervention. One way to do this is through curriculum-based measures. Many of our schools don't have curriculum-based measures except for DIBELS, now known as Acadians. Here is a free website, Intervention Central, where you can create or download already made curriculum-based measures. Click on the link CBM/downloads. You will see there's a CBM warehouse along with other resources. Click on the CBM warehouse. Here you can find ready-made letter name and fluency and letter sound fluency generators, oral reading fluency generators, maze passage generators, math fluency, math computation, and written expression generators. Each column has the test itself with both a teacher version and student version, and the second column has directions and norms so that you will know what is expected of students. When we're considering insufficient progress, we must document the instructional strategies that we used and the progress monitoring data. So that means we need to explain which interventions did we use regularly. We need to show that we used a same tool or strategy over time to give it time to work. We want to make sure that our time and increments that we are progress monitoring are as consistent as possible. And progress monitoring should be more frequent with the intensity of the intervention increasing. So again, we want to be emphasizing the explicit nature of our interventions, that they are structured and that they are systematized. Here are examples of how a student might respond to interventions. If the expected trajectory is the green line, a positive response to intervention would show that the gap is actually closing. A questionable response to intervention might be that the line is staying relatively parallel or closing at a very slow rate. A poor response to intervention is when the line is parallel or even moving away from the expected trajectory, so the gap is widening. The last step of documenting sufficient progress is taking action. If we see a student after 8 weeks has fallen off our aim line, we need to do something differently. If we see the student is closing the gap with research based interventions, this suggests that they are responding to the interventions and it may not be a specific learning disability. One thing to keep in mind, remember our friend Mateo? He needed to gain 6 words per week in order to close the gap. Fuchs and their colleagues have done some research on what is realistic weekly growth rates and what is ambitious growth rates. You'll notice the younger the student, the more we can hope to gain. However, around 6th grade, it is very difficult to add words correct per minute. It is not impossible, but this should give you a guide of what is ambitious and realistic growth. And our friend Mateo may not close the gap this year, but if he is on that ambitious weekly growth rate, we can see the gap will close eventually. Some additional requirements for your body of evidence. There must be an observation. It should be in the learning environment in the area where we suspect the student is impacted. For example, if we think the student is struggling with reading comprehension, it might make sense to observe them in a science or social studies or reading class when reading comprehension is required. Document the academic performance and behavior in the areas of difficulty. Make sure you use the information from the observation you can use the information from an observation that was prior to the referral meeting, or you could conduct new observations even after the consent is signed. For initial evaluations, there are a few additional requirements. You need to document the parent was notified regarding the amount and nature of performance data collected and the general ed services provided. You must also document the strategies that were used to increase the rate of learning and that parents were provided with the results of the progress monitoring assessment data. Also, parents needed to know before we got to this stage that they have a right to request an evaluation at any time. You might consider putting this in the student history section. Also, you're required to document any educationally relevant medical findings. For example, if a student has a clinical diagnosis of dyslexia or attention deficit disorder, you will need to include that in the evaluation report. Okay, quiz time. What's required in an SLD body of evidence? Remember, it's determined by a team knowledgeable about the child and about the meaning of the evaluation data. We have to have 2 eligibility criteria met for any area of SLD. Is there a gap, and is there insufficient progress given research-based intervention? This decision is made by the eligibility determination team. The law says you have to have at least one teacher or other specialist with knowledge in the area of the child's suspected disability. Qualified individuals who can interpret test results, the child's teacher, and the parent of the child or guardian. At the eligibility determination meeting, we want to make sure that parents have the opportunity to participate as equals. To do this, make sure you share the evaluation report with the parent prior to the meeting so that they have time to review the report. The report must be written in parent-friendly language. It should fully explain the results of the evaluations so the parent can understand what we have learned about their child through this process. And we should look to triangulate our data and synthesize the information in the summary so that we can understand if all of the data point in the same direction. At the meeting, ask parents if they had time to review the report, if it accurately captures their child, and if they have any questions. If the parents did read the report, you do not need to read the whole thing to them. Briefly review the evaluation summary and the synthesis of all the data. Verify that all participants understand the information. Then review the eligibility checklist as a team and discuss each criteria as it relates to the data in the evaluation report. Remember, to answer the eligibility questions, we have to see evidence of it in the report. And what are those two criteria? Is there a gap? And is there insufficient progress to close the gap given research-based interventions? Once again, these are the areas where a student could have a specific learning disability. It's possible a student could have more than one box checked. Make sure for any boxes you check, a stranger could find proof in the evaluation report to understand why the box is checked. All right, that was a lot of information. Take a moment to pause. Do you have any lingering questions about SLD eligibility? Your Assistant Director of Special Ed is a great person to reach out to. A few additional resources. The Colorado Department of Education has quite a lot of resources and professional learning about dyslexia. Click the link here to find all of those resources. The Special Education Department and English Language Acquisition Department have also put together a tremendous amount of resources for identifying students who are language learners with learning disabilities. Click on this link for that information. Some students are twice exceptional, meaning they're both gifted and talented, and they have a disability. For more information, click on this link. Finally, here are some additional resources from the Colorado Department of Education. The Specific Learning Disabilities Guideline is a very lengthy document that provides much more detail than today's training. There is also a link to CDE's general resources on specific learning disabilities. Here are a few other resources: the CBM Realistic Growth, which I shared with you earlier, and a really helpful tool for parents when understanding the difference between a clinical diagnosis, such as dyslexia, and special education eligibility. There's a helpful table. There we go. There's a helpful table that can help parents understand the difference between the school identification and the clinical diagnosis. Thanks so much for attending. I appreciate your attention, and if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to your assistant director, and have a great day.